never catch up. And with Henry's point on always having smaller like life, I have two things to say about that. First of all, we already know there is like microorganisms.
Shut up.
But the thing about atoms, I would say, is that makes sense because like I don't know what Schrodinger's wave equation is or something like that, but it's like super complicated. And the lower you get, the more complicated things get, right? So maybe that might be kind of agreeing with what you're saying because the lower you get, the more you don't know. And maybe the reason it's so complicated is because of like public economics today, because there's so many parts of society. Economics is complicated, and when you get down to an atom, it's so complicated because there's so many little parts that make it up, and it might be life. I don't know.
Okay, I didn't really get the, like how you connected like atoms to our economy, but alright. But like some good points before that. Yeah.
I had something else that I wanted to ask you guys, which was so because I'm doing biomimicry, and there's one big person, like there's loads, but the biggest person in the biomimicry industry is Janine Benyus, and the end of her talk was, okay, so now we have to choose what is worth saving, because with biomimicry you have the possibility to choose what to save, and also so it has to do both with the conservation of animals in the future, because like it has to do with looking at nature, both the chemistry of it as well as the processes and forms, and then applying that to designing more effective and biodegradable and sustainable products, and as well as ecosystems. So there's also this idea of making a almost like a nature like economy. So like the same way that a like leaf is part of a plant, that is part of a forest, that is part of a like biome, that is part of a sustaining biosphere, doing something that with every product in our chain rather than having something that just goes to waste and that doesn't have a part in the cycle. But apart from that, what she was saying though really resonated with me. So what is worth saving is what I would ask you guys. And also another thing that I thought about myself was, okay, so what is worth saving? What everyone would say is humans are worth saving, right?
No.
I mean, I would say that. Really.
Yeah.
But
then the question is that I asked myself was,
why?
so obviously some obvious ones, but if you go deeper into it, why are humans worth saving?
They actually are
Because we
not.
wanna survive,
Honestly, like
that's why.
we are just some living creatures who got to live somehow. Like nobody knows how. I'm like sure it's not like because like God made us in 7 days, but whatever. Yeah, my point was yeah. So we just happen to live, and we probably gonna die within like the next few million years. Like since like we only live for 20,000 years so far. Like that's when the human species, like the Homo sapiens, began. And like just thinking about that, we just happen to live like, and nobody fucking cares if we do or if we don't. Like it won't happen anything, and like on the Earth might be happy about us going. So I don't think they would be worth to be saved.
But I
Do you
disagree
think
with
we're
that
worth saving?
because, like, I mean, Henry said we've been living for, like 20,000 years. Like we could take that as a bad thing. It's like, oh, we only survived for 20,000 years. That's lame, boring. But then you could look at like Homo erectus. They've been living for like 1,000,000 years, and they still
And
don't
then they
know how to like,
died because
smash
of
two
us.
rocks together. And so we could say
And we killed
we've
them
been
in
living
like
like
5,000
a
years.
500th of what these people have been living, and look where we are, and look what, like even if we live 1,000,000 years, think of what we can achieve. Like maybe we can make matter out of nothing, like break the rules of the universe, and then live eternally or something like that. When it comes to technology, you guys probably figured this out. I'm like way too optimistic about that stuff. I'm like, all right, like next year we're gonna figure out like stem cells, and our life expectancy is gonna jump out 50 years.
I think that's something with that also that was interesting to me as a point that I came across talking about this with a friend was the fact that us humans have a greater consciousness. So something that a friend argued was, okay, well then what's the point in, okay, we die and the world is beautiful, it heals, the planet Earth heals and all the planets are thriving. But then there's no one there to see it, there's no one there to enjoy it. There's no one there to actually notice all this beauty.
Wow.
Is there any point in having all this stuff at all then?
There was a really good YouTube video from X1 Urba about that. Like he was telling about
Can you
like
send it to us
Huh?
later? if you can.
Sorry?
Could you send like the link to the video?
Yeah, sure, totally. And he was basically just talking about like a whole society or a whole like world living, like this was hypothetical, like for thousands of years, and they achieved everything. They made multiplanetaries. They made themselves multiplanetary. They achieved everything. They got like to the climate neutral point. I don't know, like that's just like a thought experiment. But they never were consciousness. They were only 100% effective, and they were not living. And obviously they died because like something happened. Like that's going to happen at one time and point at one point in time. Like also with like us humans, like maybe like a star colliding into like our
Yeah.
like into Earth or whatever. We don't know that. And like then they were gone. And like, if it would it be worth saving those people or those creatures since they were not actually living? And now we're getting to a point like what makes people live? Like what is it to actually live? And like since we're consciousness, what we think is something really special. So it's like I don't know. I guess ants are not consciousness or something. I read about this that there are a few animals on the earth that are not consciousness, that they don't know that they exist. And like also would they feel pain if they die? You know, like since they are not, they aren't aware. Like would they feel that they're dying or whatever?
I think that with consciousness, it doesn't refer too much of the level of pain. I think that it's not really. So I think that's something that, like, they feel. So I was reading in Yuval's book that I have about pigs. So what we say is that we treat them well, right? When like they're that when we feed them,
Sorry.
so then we can slaughter them. We still give them food and we give them the necessary, but it doesn't mean that they're not in pain. And what he was talking about is that these pigs suffer such a painful life because they're so distressed, but they have everything they need for survival. But if you put us in a cage and gave us food, we would still be like living a hell of a life closed up in a cage like that. But
Would
we
it be
had
worth
everything
it?
to survive.
Would it be worth it living, even though if you only live in pain?
No, I don't think so.
So now we
I
all.
think it would be worth it.
I don't
I
think
mean,
so.
I still think you can choose whether you feel pain or not. So, to a certain degree, obviously it's harder, but especially what Epictetus was saying, that he was a slave at the time. And he said, well, you choose how you feel about things. So, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control the way you channel it. So, something that I was thinking about is that all the time we say, oh, like this person made me angry, or this action made me upset, or like that movie made me cry, but it's not true. We decide to cry because of the movie. We decide to interpret it in such a way that made us cry. But we could have been like, oh, like I hate the dentist and I'm super scared. I could have been like, oh, I love the dentist, but I choose to be scared. It's not the dentist that says, oh, I'm gonna scare Elena. Like in some like occasions it happens that someone wants to scare you, but you still have the power of how that affects you. I think to a certain degree it's hard, but if you do have that control over yourself, because we all do have it, even though sometimes we give it to others, it's actually within us, and I think we have the power to change that.
And also consciousness is, like Henry said, ants aren't conscious. Well, like consciousness is like such a fuzzy term that you can literally argue anything is conscious. Like I could argue that this phone is conscious just because it's made of a complex network of things. Our brain, the individual cells, are not conscious apparently, but since they're like such a sophisticated network of things, they can like understand themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that with anything. You can do that with Rubik's cubes. If you somehow built like a network of 1 trillion Rubik's cubes, you could make like a Rubik's cube that's conscious. I think that's definitely possible. So yeah, like you could argue that an atom is conscious, let alone an ant.
Yes.
So I personally disagree with the point that like these animals are not conscious, these animals are conscious. I think like even a simple neural network with one node, you can consider that conscious. So instead of thinking of consciousness as binary, it's important to think of consciousness as like a scale of how conscious you are. Because ants might be like really minimally conscious, but humans might be like upper in that scale and like quite conscious, but then there's that like super intelligent alien that's like fully conscious or something.
But what would fully conscious mean to you? I mean, we already know that we exist. What could be bigger than that? Like, obviously, we cannot know since then we would be like higher, but whatever.
Maybe have like meta consciousness, which sounds really cool, but I don't know what it means. Like
That makes sense.
when like meta consciousness, you're conscious of your consciousness.
But I have one
Yeah.
thing though, like sometimes because I'm quite sensitive and I can get like, I would describe it as conscious about like the stuff around me, and because there's so much like pain in like planet Earth, there's so much like pointless suffering as well that could be prevented. There's so much disparity. There's so many things that are just, there's such polarization in our like society as well. There's just so many things that are wrong, and I think that when you do get that sort of awareness, really, what you do is switch it off. I mean, if I were to decide to get aware about everything, then you also have to come to terms with the negative. And I think that when you are so aware, like I know some like other people, friends of mine that do have that, then the best thing to do is just actually I'll focus on the small thing. I'll move away from thinking about that, because first of all I won't change anything, and then, well, I'm not sure how this really applies, but I'm just saying that like people, like when I try to get really conscious, then usually I turn out being sad. So
Yeah. I guess like if you would be like, you know, like dogs for example, they're not sad since they're like, I mean, are they sad? I guess they are sad, but like
okay.
like the smarter you are, like this sounds harsh, but it is. Like the faster you realize that your life is like really much like there's no point in living, and then you're like, huh. So what am I gonna
And I
do?
make the best out of it.
I mean,
But like you could take that a very different way. That's like appreciating the unknown. Because if you are scared of the unknown and you don't like it, because it's kind of like the square cube law. If you are a sphere as a human, and as you grow, your surface area increases faster than your volume. That's not true, actually. That's a bad metaphor. If you are something that the more you grow, the more you don't know. It's like the perimeter of a circle. So if you learn to appreciate not knowing something, which is I think what some philosophers do, they're just really curious. Like Einstein, you don't turn out being exponentially unhappier. You turn out being exponentially happier because like there's so much unknown, and you like the unknown because it's more things to be discovered and to think about.
there was this one guy in the old Socrates. Like there was one famous quote of him, like the moment he died, before he died, like because he was saying like stuff against God and stuff, which wasn't really people didn't like back then. And he was saying the only thing he knows is that he doesn't know anything.
That's very interesting.
And like that's honestly true because we don't know anything. What is truth? Like we don't even know. Like you know, for example, like media. For example, media is telling us a lot of stuff. But none. I tell you, there's no media which is 100% right.
Absolutely not.
There is nothing.
Absolutely.
There's nothing like truth. I don't know.
And
By
we have so
2050, there's going to be more fake news than like reality. And
so much like trust in the. I mean, obviously, I'm on board with the scientific method, like fully on board because that's the best method that we got today. So I would say like baby imagination is like religion. You just say like, oh yeah, Jesus came down, came from the clouds, and you explain everything with that with no like observation at all. And then like, 20-year-old human decision is like science, where you actually observe things and you make conclusions out of those. But there's still a problem with the scientific method, and that is it doesn't take into account extreme coincidences. Like you make an experiment and you get a result, and if they're like, oh yeah, it has to be repeatable. But what if a rare thing happens like 500 times in a row? In the scientific community, they're like, yeah, well, that's the way things are. But it might not be that way, which we don't take into account. But I'm fully on board with that.
If it happens 5,000 times, do you still think it's rare?
Like, it could be like if it's true probability, it could be 0.000001, but you will never know that because it's probability. Like, yeah.
I think that another thing that I was looking into that I thought was really interesting is still from Yuval's book was about animalism. So it was like the fact that we, like when we were first like living, we were living with animals and like we did live with them, and then like we communicated with them too, and like also looking at like tribes and how they like live with animals. And I know like something that he said that was really interesting was he said, so let's start looking at how we treat animals, right? So we love them and eat them and slaughter them and etc. And then he said, do you think that that's going to be the same thing that robots are going to do to us? Because we were the superior ones and we did that to other animals. Well, obviously it might be different, but it was still an interesting perspective of it, just thinking, well, actually that could be the same with a computer. We give it all the knowledge and they'll be like, we'll use them as our slaves. Like, I know.
So now we're heading over to AI and like how robots are gonna kill us one day. I mean...
Oh, I'm gonna have to go like in a little bit, so tonight I get an early night's sleep because I need it, if that's okay.
Yeah, same. Yeah, but this was really, really interesting. Do we still want to talk like 5 minutes about AI, or do we want to like stop?
Yeah, absolutely.
Alright, so what I would like to start off is like... Obviously, I don't know. Like, I guess like we are able to like program simple tasks into those massive AIs, which they have to follow. Since it's like some kind of like treating system, like if you do something that's good and we treat you well, and otherwise you get minus points, or like some kind of system like getting plus and minus points, and if you kill a person you get minus points, and they obviously don't want to do that. And that's on one side where I'm thinking like, okay, they won't do it, but on the other side they might see the bigger picture. They might understand that people are killing each other, and by killing one life they could save 10 potential other lives because this person was about to like blow himself off in the street or whatever. And then there's the question, like, what is okay? Are they allowed to like kill somebody in the case that this person is trying to kill other people? Or like, is that too much? Should a robot not be allowed to do that at all?
I mean, policemen can. They have the authority to kill someone if they think they're dangerous and that they're a threat to other human beings. Just in like special occasions, but they can. So I don't know. I just think that like something else that actually about this during the AI discussion that we had a while ago, I think it was. So we were talking about ethics and the fact that okay, so we get this computer and we give it all the knowledge, but then it's not going to be a human unless we get to the point where they think like humans, but they don't actually. So was